Field Marshal Erwin Rommel earned his fame as a commander of mobile armored forces in Europe and North Africa from 1940 to 1943. He was unique in being praised by both sides in the war. In the summer of 1942, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill described him as a very skillful and daring opponent, and a great general, and in Germany he was known as the People's Marshal. Rommel's rise to prominence was due, in fact, to his association with the Nazi Party, who held him up as an example of a good German. A much decorated junior infantry officer in World War I and an advocate of bold, aggressive tactical doctrines, Rommel was exactly the kind of military tactician who appealed to Hitler. In the late 1930s, the Führer drew Rommel from the relative obscurity of a military academy into his entourage, giving him command of his personal escort battalion. The pair's respect and admiration was mutual. Rommel described Hitler as a military genius. Although Rommel had no experience with tanks, his personal influence with the Führer won him command of an armored division for the invasion of France in May 1940. He more than justified the choice. His 7th Armored Division earned the nickname the Ghost Division, because the speed of its advance from the Aden region to the Channel coast caused even the German High Command to lose track of its movements. Rommel's absolute determination to maintain forward momentum, despite the risks of exposed flanks and outrunning supplies, played a decisive part in the early German victory. He ended the campaign as one of its heroes and was promoted to Major General in 1941. As well as being promoted, Rommel was further rewarded for his impressive contribution to the successful invasion of France by being sent to the North African desert, first as the leader of the German Africa Corps and subsequently as commander of all Axis forces in North Africa. The location and conditions of the Desert War were particularly suited to Rommel's strengths. With control of his own show, he was uncomfortable in his relation to higher command. He was often presented with opportunities for rapid movement and maneuver. Rommel was above all else a flexible tactician, commanding from the front and improvising imaginative responses to a constantly changing battlefield situation. From the first moment of his arrival in Libya, he proved that even with limited strength at his disposal, he could outwit and outmaneuver the slower-moving British forces. He molded his armored forces into a highly motivated team, winning the loyalty and respect of his subordinates, and swiftly weeded out any officers who he deemed not up to scratch. The ultimate failure of the Axis forces in the Desert War was largely due to elements beyond Rommel's control. Yet, even after his forces were held in July 1942 at El Alamein, stopped in September at El Halfa, and finally defeated in November at the Second Battle of El Alamein, he had demonstrated his outstanding skills as a battlefield commander in a series of ultimately doom-fighting withdrawals and counterattacks. After the Axis surrender in North Africa in 1943, the Nazi regime didn't know what to do with Rommel. Goebbels' propaganda machine had made Rommel into a German icon, but the shadow of defeat in Africa tarnished his reputation, and his health had deteriorated under the strain of war. Eventually given the responsibility for the defense of the French coast, his efforts ensured that the defenses of Normandy were improved. But the success of Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion in June 1944, showed the accuracy of his prediction that, once a beachhead was established, this would prove impossible to dislodge. Rommel's personal reputation was untarnished by responsibility for massacre or atrocity, and his treatment of Allied prisoners of war was exemplary, but he was never an opponent of Nazi ideology. He was, however, increasingly critical of the regime for the failings of its military leadership. By 1944, Rommel could see that his country was heading into an abyss. He played no part in the plot to assassinate Hitler in July 1944, but his off-the-record criticisms of the conduct of the war brought him under suspicion. Convalescing after being wounded in Normandy, Rommel was offered choice of taking poison, in which case his family would be spared from Hitler's vengeance or face persecution as a traitor. He chose suicide, allowing the regime to claim that he had died of his wounds, maintaining his status as a war hero. His tragedy was the same as all those patriotic Germans who welcomed the opportunities the Nazi regime offered and who realized their mistake far too late.